Hi everybody, this is Warren Herman. Today what we're going to do is we are going to begin our first video in our series about ulcerative colitis, TMS, and the Catholic faith. It may seem, if you are somebody coming to this subject and you are not Catholic, it might seem kind of bizarre about why would there be a specific video series about a specific ailment for a specific religion. And the essential answer is going to be that I don't believe that I'm speaking about a random religion with relation to this ailment, but instead, Catholicism speaks about a very specific understanding of the human person and gives us a way of looking at the world that actually helps us do TMS treatment better. So, of course, my goal is for everybody to be Catholic. But the secondary goal here is for us to be able to experience our healing in a way that doesn't give us unwanted side effects and makes the most of our journey with TMS mind-body methods. So, to begin our video, we really need to begin to understand what is TMS, what is the mind-body kind of solution, and something about the history of this. So, and also what is ulcerative colitis. So ulcerative colitis is an intestinal problem where you get inflammation in your colon. And it's treated in various different ways. And I have experienced a number of different ways of treating it. So right now I had a very severe flare, so to speak. So right now I am on, I guess, what are infusions. So in the past, I've been able to experience remission through the use of prayer and mind-body methods. And that was the only time I was able to experience remission. And usually I have not experienced remission independent of mind-body methods. So the thing is that even when I've been using steroids, for example, they don't work anywhere near as well if I'm not using mind-body methods. So the thing is that I believe in an integrative approach to TMS treatment. I'm a little bit more open to medical things, but that's just because I'm in a position where, hey, it's either that, sometimes you may need to use a medicine or you're just going to die. But the thing is, really that I do very much believe that the evidence, and this is another piece, this is not medical advice. This is, you follow what your doctor says. This is my personal journey and educational stuff that I think is related to faith and, recovery. But I'm not a doctor. This is not therapy. This is not anything. This is just a person talking about their experience with ulcerative colitis, with their faith, and with their use of mind-body methods. That being said, I do believe that I'm saying something of value about these things. But make sure you are responsible with this information and don't just do dumb things with it. But that's what I'm saying here. So the thing is really, that's giving us the kind of groundwork here. And to understand, yes, I've experienced recovery through mind-body methods in the past, and plus some prayer things. And there's a video that I made a while back about recovery from ulcerative colitis through mind-body methods. And I've experienced many setbacks in my treatment that seem very clearly, there's no reason to doubt that they are due to fear. And that sometimes the normal methods of treatment strike the fear that brings about the problems to some degree. So we're going to, in these video series, we're going to try to have this goal of reviewing the available videos about ulcerative colitis on the internet, so that these videos, which are about ulcerative colitis and about a TMS perspective, can be reviewed from a Catholic lens, which I believe is an accurate human anthropological lens. And so this is going to let us have the best understanding, in my opinion, of how to approach this with TMS. And these videos are going to be made both for myself and for anyone else who wants to watch them. So they're going to be both. This is both my project for my own recovery and taking other people along for the ride, taking a look at what these ideas can mean for us. And so to begin with, I want to just say, that many of the people who are going to be discussed in these videos have their own perspectives on TMS healing. And they don't necessarily endorse what I'm going to say. And I think the real answer is that they would probably endorse about half of what I'm going to say, and I'll endorse about half of what they're going to say. So it's just that we have different life experiences, and that's the thing. But I want to also, show the respect that is due to the people who've shared their journeys and tried to trailblaze for us so that we can also recover from these things. And just the funniest thing is to remember, with TMS recovery, it's very humorous that as I'm talking about this, I'm experiencing all these pains in my body that I did not have all day until I'm talking about it. So it's very clear that this is neuroplastic pain. And that brings us into the understanding of what is TMS. TMS is, I believe, best described by Dan Buglio, who describes it as PDP or PDS, meaning perceived danger symptoms or perceived danger pains. And we can also call this neuroplastic pain. And the way to understand this, I believe the easiest way to understand this, is to think about a panic attack. When a person is having a panic attack, they often believe, and I've had this happen to me once because I didn't eat all day and there was a terrible crisis situation. I've had one experience that's like this, where you have this sense that you're going to have a heart attack. And the amazing thing is that if you believe you're having a heart attack, then your anxiety keeps spiking. But if you don't believe you're having a heart attack, your anxiety can calm down. So it's the belief in the physical thing that reifies the process that's bringing about the symptom that's making it feedback. It's kind of like when you're on Zoom in the old days and you're sitting there and it's this feedback. It goes beep, 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 beep. And that's what it's like. It's a feedback between the brain and the body and the mind. The brain, body, and mind are all creating feedback and amplifying each other's effects. And this can happen on many different levels. And so it's something that I think is very important to keep in mind because this is how our bodies work. And in fact, the most validated thing in all of medicine is the placebo effect, and I would assume also the nocebo effect, meaning thinking that you have something wrong going on with you. So the placebo effect is the idea that, when you have the expectation that things are going to get better, you do. Our expectations are almost hypnotic. They are a dynamic process that is deeply validated, and this is not even a strange idea. This is simply the way things are. PDP is essentially speaking about, or TMS is speaking about the influence of fear and expectation effects upon the body and the mind and how these things interrelate and how these things either support or help break out of the disease process. And ultimately, we talk about how many disease processes are actually the TMS process. And so that there are some things which are, have some more of a physical root, but some things that are almost entirely just TMS and just PDP. And some things may have had a physical root at some point, but now are just held in place by PDP. And so it's an interesting thing to think about. And it's been around for a while. The kind of approach was founded by John Sarno. Dr. John Sarno kind of began things with this. So there's people like Nicole Sachs and Dan Buglio and Dr. Howard Schubner and all these people who speak about this. So today, what we're going to do is we're going to dive into our first video that we're going to speak about here. And this is a video that I actually like because in a way, this video brings out the two people who are, I think, seem to be the people who are kind of out there who are most prominent ulcerative colitis TMS people. And these are Helmut Kokritz and Betsy Jensen. And this is actually an interview of Helmut Kokritz interviewing Betsy Jensen. And I'll undoubtedly make videos reviewing and kind of riffing off of things that Betsy Jensen and Helmut Kokritz make in the future because they are people who've recovered from ulcerative colitis through a TMS approach. And so that's why they're going to kind of be the trailblazers that we're going to study. And so, of course, there's some elements that I'm going to differ with them on. But this is not something where I'm like, hey, I'm criticizing them in a kind of a mean way. I'm just talking about my approach as a Catholic to TMS recovery and how it differs from theirs in some ways. And of course, there's things that I think might be dangerous there, or things from a spiritual sense might be dangerous. But this doesn't mean that I don't like Betsy Jensen and Helmut Kokritz. In fact, I hope to speak with them someday about their recovery process. And I want to understand that this video is not meant as any type of personal criticism of them. And this is just meant to be a way of talking about these all-important subjects for our recovery and processing them in my own mind. So again, if Helmut Kokritz or Betsy Jensen, if you ever watch this, I hope to talk to you someday about my own recovery, and I hope that we could have a fruitful, good discussion about that, because I think that there's a lot of things that we can really speak about here, and people are going to have different approaches, but it doesn't mean we can't learn from each other in certain ways, and have as they say, iron sharpens iron in various ways. And we shouldn't always think of ourselves as the sharpest tool in the shed. That's, for me, that is. So I think there's a lot I have to learn from these people, and that's why I'm saying I'm not the sharpest tool in the shed. But we all have our insights. We all have our abilities to grow and to change. And so I think we have a lot to learn from each other in various ways. And so we're going to begin by talking about themes that they discussed, that Helmut and Betsy spoke about. And they began the video by speaking about different things like toxic relationships. And it's very interesting because toxic relationships can be a source of fear. And as we've seen, fear is something that enables us to have problems, because fear turns off different body systems. Fear changes what our body is doing. And so it makes perfect sense that toxic relationships would kind of make us wince in various ways and kind of become tense and lead to inflammation, so on and so forth, and ending the natural anti-inflammatory cycles in the body. Makes perfect sense. I'm looking here at different things. What was also very interesting was that Betsy spoke about her upbringing as a Mormon. And so I really like the Mormon faith in some ways. I like its family orientation. There's certain aspects I really like about it, and I have a very, very good interactions with Mormons. Although I very much reject the Mormon claims, I've really learned a lot from studying Mormon faith crisis. I've learned a lot from these things. So I want to understand that I'm not being just like judgmental. I really don't believe that Mormonism is true. And I think what's interesting is that Betsy describes her experience growing up in a high control environment. And that's what she describes this as. And many people in the deconstruction of religion field will use, I think, similar terms, like high control and so on and so forth. And I actually do agree with this to a degree, because the interesting thing is that I believe that we often learn our faith, whatever that is, even if it's that we're learning a faith different than the one our parents have, which is more of my case. Like I got into Buddhism and all these different things early on before I became Catholic, or returned to the practice of being Catholic. I think that one of the most interesting things is that we really do have to unlearn things, in a sense. We have to unlearn what we've learned, as Yoda says. There's this thing where we have, and then we have to relearn it in a new way, because many times we learn things in a fear-based manner because we're young, and we learn it as part of the early childhood defenses. And so there is a real truth in which, yes, we can kind of have this high control mental environment that can come about when we consent to the religion of our parents, or try to create some other structure, So in our early lives, we will often have a defensive approach or a fear-based approach to religion that needs to be reformed. And this doesn't mean that we need to actually throw out our religion. And that would be the thing that I would differ on, is like, I think that, Mormonism is not the true faith of Jesus Christ. But I would also say that it's not good to throw the baby out with the bathwater, and that it's necessary to find the true church. And to find the true church in a way that is true, in a way that is good, in a way that is beautiful, rather than taking it as a high control message of fear into ourselves. So yeah, that's something very important. So that's something that we could also comment on here. Something I would like to say also is that they speak about the nature of different ailments. And I like to share this idea called multiple circles. If we want to just say, okay, like obsessive thoughts are in the mind. Anxiety is also in the body. Pain is getting into the body. Inflammation is an even bigger circle getting into the process. So I think the thing is, the further out you get, the more you might need some medicine. And that doesn't mean you might not, if it's really going bonkers in the middle at the thought level, yeah, you might need some medicine for that. So the more intense and the more exterior of a circle you get, the more you might need an external help beyond just simple knowledge. And so I think that's a good, important thing. And it's really interesting because I think it's interesting how they talked about the category of autoimmune disorders as something that has become more popular to kind of separate these things out from TMS. But I actually think that when we have a more integrative model of how TMS works, we should actually be applying TMS always. TMS is actually always in play. The question is whether there's something physical. Our expectations are always involved. The question is whether there's something other than our expectations involved. And so the thing is that we really do have to understand that in chronic and autoimmune illnesses, it's not possible that there is no expectation effects involved. It's just, is there something else beyond that? So that's how I look at it. So remember, don't take my medical advice, but I don't think that it's rational to assume that you could have something going on in a human mind without the human mind impacting it. And so I think it's very interesting that, as Betsy described, she was able to recover from ulcerative colitis because it was on the list of things in Dr. Sarno's book, which shows a danger of moving it out of that list. Because when you have the belief that you could overcome it, then it becomes possible. But if you just don't believe it, that's exactly the mechanism by which things don't work. So we got to believe it. I want to show you something. The little squirrel is chilling over there. He's looking. He's looking. He's looking around. All right, so that was a little fun moment. All right. So those are some interesting things there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read out some other things that were spoken about in this, that are kind of on my list here. As you could see, there's a big list of all kinds of things that I scribbled down, and my handwriting good. So my handwriting is not that good. So we're going to try to get some good insights out of this blend of things that I've written down. All right. Here's one of the things that Helmut spoke about. He spoke about that sometimes the body can mimic symptoms. And so, for example, you can have things where the body can mimic a flare, or it can kind of create something like that. And he speaks about how, the body can kind of mimic symptoms that might not really be going on because it remembers how they felt. It kind of has the information in it to bring about that sensation. It's interesting that I've seen this as saying that people who've been on drugs, for example, in different ways, people who've taken illegal drugs, they can, for example, let's say they have an association to taking a pill, which brings about the effects of the drug. When they then take a vitamin pill, like such as a like let's say a vitamin, a dental vitamin or something, they will have the effects of the illegal drug all of a sudden kick in, because their body has an association between taking a pill and getting high. So the interesting thing to realize is that some things are generated by mimicry, and this is the same for pains. So that's important to keep this in mind, that there are mimic effects in the body that are associations, and they're not the actual things. So that's a very interesting thing there. So another thing we will say here is that we have to treat things to whether they are acute or whether they are chronic. And this is something that Dan Buglio speaks about. For acute conditions, we need to have medical intervention. You break your arm, you go to the hospital. But if we have chronic things, sometimes it's helpful to take a TMS approach. I have weird pains in my arm that are unexplained, or even they're after the surgery, it's all over, there's nothing actually wrong with the arm, but you still experience pains. It might be TMS or PDP. So that's an important thing, the distinction between the chronic and the acute. And I'm sorry, I'm getting sleepy. One thing also, they said this somewhere, they said the body is the barometer. And in a way, the body can be a barometer of the unconscious mind. And so in a way, we don't want to think of our body as the enemy. We want to think of our body as the doorway to the unconscious, where we deal with the way the unconscious unloads itself. There's the unconscious mind, which contains an amount of different kinds of issues, different kinds of fears, things like that. It has all these issues in it. And when we see that the body is responding by generating TMS, then we actually have a portal to deal with it. We have by dealing with those sensations, we actually get in touch with the unconscious in order to resolve its content. So we have to understand that the whole process can be usable, and that will be helpful in coping with it. Another interesting thing that Helmut spoke about is the fact that sometimes when you recover from illnesses through a TMS approach, sometimes people will tell you you didn't have the illness to begin with. And it's very important to realize that this is because this is a different paradigm of illness, and people are usually not ready to embrace it. And so the thing is that people will sometimes just discount your experience, say it didn't happen, because they are plugged into a paradigm where these things don't happen. And this can happen in the case of doctors because they're used to a certain progression of a disease. This can happen just to people in your family. And it's important to realize why people's minds have this kind of blinder to it. And that why that happens, so you don't get as frustrated with this pattern. Another thing that's very interesting is that TMS, they say it didn't happen. Yeah, and it's interesting, Betsy actually used a very interesting analogy, talking about the rumble strips on the freeway. She talked about how we should consider TMS and the things in our body as a signal, not as an alarm. And kind of realize that, hey, if you drift off the freeway, you kind of bump into that strip and you go back. And I guess she's in some other place where they call it the freeway rather than the highway. But think of it as a signal, not an alarm. It's information about where you're at. It's not information about where you'll always be. And that is the shift. I think a lot of times we think that, if we have symptoms, we're always going to have this problem. But it's really a signal about what's going on in you right now. I also liked Helmut said something. I think he said face it to erase it. That's the way you got to do it is you have to face it to erase it. That's the way we deal with all these symptoms, and that's how it works. All right, so I think we're coming up on a half hour, and I'm getting sleepy. This one. I think it's very important to realize, and this is something that's been in my own experience, that Helmut and Betsy, especially in this interview, spoke about how a lot of times with ulcerative colitis, doctors will talk about like a genetic origin or these type of things. And I don't personally believe that these things are an adequate explanation of the origin of ulcerative colitis. And Betsy spoke about how there were times when, when there is, that doctors would seem to know exactly what was happening, or they would kind of seem to be kind of watching her. Okay, yeah, you're doing this to relax. Oh, great, maybe keep doing that. Or they may say things like, oh, well, everybody's different with what they can eat. And I, in my experience, did not benefit from the diets beyond just a normal thing of, okay, don't eat like a whole can of walnuts right now that you got out of the hospital. Like, other than that, I have not benefited, I don't think, from diets with ulcerative colitis, because if I changed my diet, I remained ill as long as my diet was followed. And it's not that I'm trying to make you, if you're doing better following a diet, that's fine. But I'd like you to think about whether following the diet is creating the effect of safety by knowing that you're eating safe foods as a belief, or because the foods are actually safe. Because the thing is, I remember just kind of like having a problem. Like, I couldn't figure out what was really allowed to be eaten or why. And, and I joke about this, that when you read a book about what to eat, this is only a joke. I'm exaggerating, but it's a joke. Like, when you get a book on how to eat for ulcerative colitis, the first chapter is about how not to eat chicken, and the rest is about how to prepare chicken. That would be my joke, because it's like you have this sense in which you're like, wait, like, this is not adding up. Like, there doesn't seem to be a clear answer for why this is a problem, or why that's not a problem. And so that's a big deal there. So here goes an airplane or a helicopter. So that's a very important thing to keep in mind, and realize that these things are not really the way to go, because they said, like, there just seem to be these inconsistent things, and I've had that experience too in various ways. And it doesn't mean that every doctor is not like thinking clearly. It doesn't mean that it's not an insult against doctors. It just seems like, okay, sometimes you just seem to get advice that just in various ways doesn't match up, and that's important to realize, because that may be your experience, and so you can break free of like being plugged into the doctor while being able to use them for what they're useful for. Well, okay, they have an expertise on how to use certain medicines. Okay, but understand that if you study this subject, you have the expertise on TMS, and you also are the expert. I think this is just normal to say, on your own body. You're the expert on your own self, and so these are important things to keep in mind. Trying to see if there's anything else I want to include here in this video. I'm looking here. Sorry guys that I'm so sleepy. This is important. The important thing in understanding TMS is that in some cases, I believe that TMS is a description of a natural process. I believe the actual nature of our symptoms is dynamic, as well as the nature of our salvation is dynamic. So I believe there's like loops of physicality in our symptoms and loops of physicality in our salvation. Like, just such as that the sacraments are physical, and then there's our prayers, and then there's our virtues, and so on and so forth. And just like there's our thoughts and our obsessive thoughts, our anxieties, our pains, our inflammation, and so on and so forth. There's all these levels. these non-linear spiraling things. I think what's very problematic is a lot of times people can kind of get a half and half method. Rather than being plugged into the sacramental life of the church and plugged into the true understanding of the body through TMS, what they get is the TMS thing leads them into a preternatural thing. And I actually think sometimes what happens is you actually have the TMS thing leading people into the New Age movement. You have people, they get into then manifestation, they get into the law of attraction, they get into all these different things. Is there some truth in these approaches? Yeah, but there's more truth in the Catholic faith. Anything that exists in these fields like manifesting or whatever, there's better Catholic alternatives of it without side effects. When you do manifesting, you're in charge of the universe. Everything's your fault. You are trying to manipulate the universe directly with your mind. And this can be done, whatever is good in it can be done by following the teachings, for example, of Blessed Solanus Casey, who said, thank God ahead of time for anything you want. And also thank him for whatever he sends. That's a more advanced teaching than anything on manifestation, because the things on manifestation are not as full spectrum. They're kind of localized into yourself controlling the world through vibes rather than you dialoguing with the infinite creator about things. So that's just some different things. I'm very sleepy. But it's important to realize that, there is this deep importance to realize that sometimes what will happen is you'll, rather than getting the full TMS approach or the full sacramental approach, you end up with something that is kind of like weird things. Woo-woo of TMS and woo-woo of the New Age gets mixed together. And this also is a problem because it places TMS not in the medical field where it belongs as a natural, real phenomena in the mind, and makes people doubt whether it's real. And so it's important that it get plugged into what is real and that it remains so. So that's important. All right, I'm looking at these different things here. Let's kind of talk about some different things here. Let's understand that whenever we have any symptoms, as Dan Buglio says, freaking out never helped anybody. The way you do this is you basically see things as no big deal. That helps turn the alarms off. And so that is very important. Betsy talked about sometimes if she speaks about her illness, her ulcerative colitis, she might have a symptom appear. But the main thing is to say it's no big deal and don't get yourself all afraid. It's very important. So that's that. I'm looking here to see if there's anything else. Looking here. All right. I want to just kind of put in here some ideas that also I thought of while watching the video. So I'm looking at these different areas and seeing different things here. So I also thought about sometimes you can have things, Freud talked about this, and it's very rare, but it sometimes happens. People have what's called a conversion disorder, where like there's a tension in the mind that gets transferred to a tension of the body. And this is very much a very real exemplification of what was called distraction pain. It's almost easier to have this weird tension manifest in the body than it is to have it be in the mind, because the mind has an unacceptable thing in it. So it's very interesting to realize that some things that are similar to TMS can be like conversion disorders. And I was thinking about that during this video. I guess what's interesting also is realizing that sometimes various things can be created through either our fear or our desire for something. I thought about the idea of religious vocation, which in the Catholic Church is an understanding of that some people are called to be nuns or priests, and things like that, called out of the ordinary vocation of marriage. And basically, I believe that PDP and perceived dangerous symptoms can lead to something that we could call neuroplastic vocation. Let's say somebody perceives family life as dangerous. If they perceive family life to be dangerous, then they're on the lookout for a way of escape. And then, if there are any signs or any evidence at all that they could be called, they will interpret it as such. So things may not, or let's just say someone is really lonely. They may interpret things as a sign that they're meant to be with somebody. The thing is that there are neuroplastic positive things that kind of come out of our desires, as well as neuroplastic negative things that get generated out of our fears. So our fears and our desires can both create neuroplastic things where there really is nothing. So that's a very interesting thing. And of course, there are some very interesting ways of processing things out. So we want to process these things out, especially if we feel we have a vocation of some kind. We want to process these things out. But the important thing here is to realize that sometimes we may have a vocation anyway because we want to follow it, even if we process out the kind of roots of it in some ways. So there could be some different complexity there, but that's its own subject. So looking at these things. All right. I also, that was very interesting, Betsy Jensen mentioned Louise Hay. And I don't agree with Louise Hay's method for the most part. Of course, I think that if we feel loved, that'll help us be healthy. But I think there's obviously a lot of problems with Louise Hay's approach from a Catholic standpoint, from a real human anthropology standpoint. I believe that. But I really thought it was interesting to think about my colitis. What could colitis be a metaphor for? And I think it's a metaphor of I can't get living water always out of the ideas that I have. Sometimes I have a lot of ideas, but it's not like being able to be assimilated. And so I was like, oh, that's an interesting way of thinking about the metaphorical meaning of colitis. And I just wonder that could maybe be useful to think of how is this metaphorically, not in a weird woo-woo idea, but just as a simple understanding of it, what might it represent, not in a weird sense. All right, those are some various ideas. The other things are really things I can't read. So I'm going to have to make sure that I do the next one closer to when I do the video because I can't read the notes that I made. But I hope that this is helpful. And I hope that this is going to help you on your journey of TMS, of understanding the world, of recovery from ulcerative colitis. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, amen.